such meetings later today.
We now head to South West Devon with Sir Gurry Street. Sir Gurry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know the whole House will want to associate itself with the Prime Minister's remarks about our dear Brian Binley. Mr. Speaker, one of the groups hit hardest by the pandemic is young people in full-time education, especially those facing exams last year and this, with all of the mental health challenges that come from such uncertainty. Does my right honourable friend agree that those for whom exams have been scrapped this year would now benefit from the utmost clarity about how exactly they will be assessed? A clear plan announced early without last-minute changes to help teachers and students prepare for an even more challenging experience. Thank you.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and there is clearly a problem of differential learning that has grown over the last few months and risks being exacerbated now by the current lockdown, and we'll do everything we can to ensure that exams are fair, that the ways of testing are set out in a timely way, and the Department for Education is launching a consultation with Ofqual to ensure that we get the right arrangements for this year.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the condolences expressed by the Prime Minister, I'm sure on behalf of the whole of the House. Can I also, Mr. Speaker, begin by paying tribute to all of those involved in the vaccine programme. I went to the Newham vaccine hub last week, and it was really uplifting to see the NHS, the Red Cross and lots of volunteers all working together and giving real hope. They had a simple message to me, which is if they had more vaccine, they could and they would do more. And I'm sure that's shared across the country. I welcome news that's come out this morning about a pilot of 24/7 vaccine centres. I anticipate there's going to be huge clamour for this. So can the Prime Minister tell us when will the 24/7 vaccine centres be open to the public, because I understand they're not at the moment, and when will they be rolled out across the country?
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for what he says about the rollout of vaccines, and I can tell him that we'll be going to 24/7 as soon as we can, and my right friend, the Health Secretary, will be setting out more about that in due course. And as he rightly says, at the moment the limit is on supply. We have a huge network, 233 hospitals, 1,000 GP surgeries, 200 pharmacies and 50 mass vaccination centres. And they are going, as he has seen himself, exceptionally fast. I pay tribute to their work, and it's thanks to the work of the NHS and to the Vaccine Task Force that we have secured more doses, I think, per capita than virtually any other country in the world, certainly more than any other country in Europe.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I obviously welcome that and urge the Prime Minister and the Government to get on with this. We're all happy to help, and there are many volunteers who are. The sooner we have 24/7 vaccine centres, the better for our NHS and the better for our economy. Mr. Speaker, the last PMQs was on the 16th of December. The Prime Minister told us then that we were seeing, in his words, a significant reduction in the virus. He told us then that there was no need for endless lockdowns and no need to change the rules about Christmas mixing. Since then, since that last PMQs, 17,000 people have died of COVID. 60,000 people have been admitted to hospital. And there's been over 1 million new cases. How did the Prime Minister get it so wrong? And why was he so slow to act?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, what he fails to point out is that on the 18th of December, 2 days later, the government was informed of the spread of the new variant, and the fact that it spreads roughly 50 to 70% faster than the old variant, and that is why it is indeed correct to say that the situation today is very troubling indeed. We have 32,000 COVID patients in hospital. The NHS is under huge strain. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to all the staff, the doctors, the nurses, everybody working now in our NHS who are doing an extraordinary job under the most challenging possible circumstances to help those who so desperately need it. And I thank them for what they are doing. But at the same time, I also want to thank all those involved in what is the biggest vaccination programme in the history of this country, where once again the NHS is in the lead, working with the Army and the Legion of volunteers and everybody else. And that programme of vaccines, Mr. Speaker, does show the way forward. It does show how we're going to come through this pandemic. And again, I repeat my gratitude to all those involved, because they've now vaccinated 2.4 million people, delivered 2.8 million doses, more than any other country in Europe. This is the toughest of times, Mr. Speaker, but we can see the way forward.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says that effectively 2 days after that PMQs, the advice changed. The truth is, the indicators were all in the wrong direction back at the last PMQs. But be that as it may, the Prime Minister says he got that advice on the 18th of December, 2 days after PMQs. And we've all seen the Sage minutes of the 22nd of December confirming the advice that was given to the government. The government's advisers warned the Prime Minister that the new variant was spreading fast and it was highly unlikely that November-style lockdowns would be sufficient to control it. Pretty clear advice on the 18th of December to the Prime Minister from Sage. Tougher lockdown than November is going to be needed. I've got the minutes here, everybody's seen them. Yet instead of acting on the 18th of December, the Prime Minister sat on his hands for over 2 weeks. We're now seeing in the daily figures the tragic consequences of that delay. So how does the Prime Minister justify delaying for 17 days after he got that advice on the 18th of December?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must disagree very profoundly with what the right honourable gentleman just said, because he knows very well that within 24 hours of getting the advice on the 18th about the spread of the new variant, we acted to put the vast part of the country into much, much tougher measures. And indeed, what we are now seeing, and it's very, very important to stress that these are early days, we are now seeing the beginnings of some signs that is starting to have an effect in many parts of the country, but by no means everywhere. And it is early days, Mr. Speaker, and people must keep their discipline, keep enforcing the rules, and work together, as I've said, to roll out that vaccine programme. But, Mr. Speaker, I do recall that on the day that we went into a national lockdown, and sadly we were obliged to shut the schools, even on that day, the Labour Party was advocating keeping schools open for understandable reasons, Mr. Speaker, because we all want to keep schools open, but I think it a bit much to be attacked for taking tougher measures to put this country into the protective measures it needed when the Labour Party were themselves calling then to keep schools open.
Mr. Speaker, just for the record, I wrote to the Prime Minister on the 22nd of December. I hadn't seen the Sage advice at that stage, saying to him, if it indicated there should be a national lockdown, he should do it immediately and he'd have our full support. I'll put that in the public domain so people can just check the record. But, Mr. Speaker, more fundamentally, the Prime Minister says we took measures straight away, we put people into different tiers. The advice was a November-style lockdown is not enough. How on earth was putting people into a different tiered system an answer to the advice that was given? And isn't this the situation that every time there's a big decision to take, the Prime Minister gets there late? The next big decision is obvious. The current restrictions are not strong enough to control the virus. Stronger restrictions are needed. And it's no point members opposite shaking their heads. In a week or two, the Prime Minister is likely to be asking members to vote for this. So can the Prime Minister tell us, when infection rates are much higher than last March, when hospital admissions are much higher than last March, When death rates are much higher than last March, why on earth are restrictions weaker than last March?
Mr. Speaker, we keep things under a constant review, and we will continue to do so. And certainly, if there is any need to toughen up restrictions, which I don't rule out, Mr. Speaker, we will of course come to this House. But perhaps, as is so often the case, the right honourable gentleman didn't listen to my earlier answer. Because I pointed out to the House that actually the lockdown measures that we had in place, combined with the Tier 4 measures that we were using, are starting to show signs of some effect, and we must take account of that too, Mr. Speaker, because nobody can doubt the serious damage that is done by lockdowns to people's mental health, to jobs, to livelihoods as well. And Mr. Speaker, if to listen to the right honourable gentleman over the last 12 months, you'd think he had absolutely no other policy except to plunge this country into 12 months of lockdown. And as for coming too late to things, Mr. Speaker, I think it was only a few weeks ago that he was attacking the vaccine task force that has secured the very doses, the millions of doses that have put this country into the comparatively favourable position that we now find ourselves.
It's just not true. Every time I've spoken about the vaccine, I've supported it. But the Prime Minister says we're balancing health restrictions and the economy. And yet we ended 2020 with the highest death toll in Europe and the deepest recession in any major economy. So that just isn't a good enough answer. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to the latest free school meals scandal. We've all seen images on social media of disgraceful food parcels for children, costed at about £5 each. That's not what the government promised. It's nowhere near enough. So can I ask the Prime Minister, would he be happy with his kids living on that? And if not, why is he happy for other people's kids to do so?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody in this House is happy with the disgraceful images that we've seen of the food parcels that have been offered. They are appalling. They're an insult to the families that have received them. And I'm grateful, by the way, to Marcus Rashford, who highlighted the issue and is doing quite an effective job by comparison with the right honourable gentleman in holding the government to account for these issues. And the company in question has rightly apologised and agreed to reimburse. But it is because we want to see our kids properly fed throughout this very difficult pandemic that we've massively increased the value of what we're providing. Another £170 million in the COVID winter grant scheme. £220 million more for the holiday activities and food programme, and we're now rolling out the national free school meal voucher scheme, as we did in March, to give parents the choice to give kids the food that they need. Under this government, we will do everything we can to ensure that no child goes hungry as a result of the privations caused by this pandemic.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says that the parcels are disgraceful, but it shouldn't have taken social media to shame the Prime Minister into action. Like the Education Secretary, he blames others, and he invites me to hold him to account. So let me do that. Because blaming others, Prime Minister, it's not as simple as that, is it? Because I've checked the government guidance on free school meals, the current guidance, published by the Department of Education. I've got it here. It sets out example parcel for one child for 5 days. Department of Education, Prime Minister, you want to be held to account. 1 loaf of bread, 2 baked potatoes, block of cheese, baked beans, 3 individual yoghurts. Sound familiar? That's the images, Prime Minister, you just called disgraceful. The only difference I can see in this list and what the Prime Minister has described as disgraceful is a tin of sweet corn, a packet of ham and a bottle of milk. So he blames others. But this is on his watch. The truth is, families come last under this government, whether it's exams, free school meals or childcare. Will the Prime Minister undertake, he wants to be held to account, to take down this guidance by the close of play today and ensure that all of our children can get a decent meal during the pandemic?
Minister.
Speaker, the right honourable gentleman's words would be less hypocritical and absurd if it were not for the fact that I
don't believe anybody's a hypocrite in this chamber. I think we need to be a little bit careful about what we're saying to each other. There was a not truth earlier, and there was also comparisons to others. Please, let's keep the discipline in this chamber and the respect for each other. We're tidying up how this Parliament behaves, and I certainly expect the leadership of both parties to ensure that takes place. Prime Minister, would you like to withdraw hypocrisy?
I'm delighted to be advised by you, Mr. Speaker. Let me confine my criticism to the absurdity of the, which I hope is acceptable, Mr. Speaker, of the right honourable gentleman attacking us over free school meals when it was a Conservative government that instituted free school meals, universal free, not a Labour government, and of the 280 billion that we have spent securing the jobs and the livelihoods of people across this country, uprating universal credit, increasing and in addition increasing the living wage by record amounts this year and last year, increasing local housing allowance. The overwhelming majority, the bulk of the measures, the benefits fall in favour of the poorest and the neediest in society, which is what this House would expect. And Mr. Speaker, he takes one position one week, one position the next. That is what he does. That's been his whole lamentable approach throughout this, if I can get away with lamentable, Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic. And he says he supports the vaccine now. He says he supports the vaccine rollout, and he goes and tries to associate himself with it because he senses that it is going well. But don't be in no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that was the party that wanted us, this country, to stay in the European Union vaccine programme. He stood on, yeah, absolutely true, he stood on a manifesto. He stood on a manifesto which he has not repudiated, Mr. Speaker, to dismantle the very pharmaceutical companies that have created this miracle of science, which is true.
Prime Minister, there are questions, and sometimes we've got to try and answer the question to what was asked of you. I think to run through the history is one thing, but in fairness, it is Prime Minister's questions. What I would say is it was the final question. We've got lots of others to go through. So I think what I'm going to do now is move on to Simon Jupp in Sidmouth, who's desperate to ask a question of you, Prime Minister. Simon Jupp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The hospitality industry is the lifeblood of East Devon. Our pubs, restaurants, cafes and hotels provide thousands of jobs, places to meet and places to stay. The generous support package now put in place will tide many of these businesses over for now, but they will need further support. Will my right honourable friend consider extending the VAT cut for hospitality to give them a helping hand when they're back open for business?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friends, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has done everything he can to help businesses throughout this pandemic, and that's why he's extended the grants, and that's why we've got the cuts for both for VAT and for business rates, and we will do everything we can to help as we go forward. But the best thing would, of course, be to ensure that we roll out this vaccine programme and bounce back as fast as possible. Any further announcements my right honourable friend makes will be well ahead of the well ahead of the 31st of March, by which we intend to have a budget.
Let's head up to Scotland to the leader of the SNP with Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent in Lochaber, a producer and exporter of shellfish, is experiencing his worst nightmare. After loading a lorry of fresh local seafood on Monday, as he's done for 35 years, his driver faced bureaucracy and delays. Brexit red tape now means that £40,000 of his fresh, high-quality produce is lost, unable to be sold. Mr. Speaker, that 40,000 produce is income for over 100 local families in many remote and fragile communities. Can the Prime Minister tell my constituent, where is the sea of opportunity that he and his Scottish Tories promised?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're putting £100 million into supporting the fishing industry in Scotland and across the whole of the of the UK, and it is the policy of the Scottish Nationalist Party not just to break up the United Kingdom under their harebrained scheme, but also to take Scotland back into the EU and hand back control of Scottish fisheries to Brussels, thereby throwing away all those opportunities in a way that I think the right honourable gentleman himself opposite would say was totally absurd. And I'm amazed that he continues on this track.
Turning to Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
I'm amazed that the Prime Minister continues to traduce the name of the Scottish National Party. He's been told before and he really should get it right. And frankly, that answer was an insult to all fishermen that are facing loss today. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that a third of the Scottish fishing fleet is tied up in harbour. Some boats are landing in Denmark rather than Scotland to avoid Brexit bureaucracy. Scottish seafood exporters are losing upwards of £1 million in sales a day. Seafood Scotland says all the extra red tape is an almost impossible task. It's even forced ferry operators to pause load deliveries to the continent. Mr. Speaker, the European Union have put in place a £5 billion fund to support businesses with the cost of Brexit. Last night, it was revealed that Ireland is receiving £1 billion of it. Can the Prime Minister tell Scottish business when they will be getting the same level of support, and where's the compensation for my constituent that's losing £40,000 today?
Mr. Speaker, he continually advocates the breakup of the union with the United Kingdom, and he continually advocates going back into the European Union, even though that would be immensely destructive to the Scottish, immensely destructive to the Scottish economy, to jobs, to livelihoods, to pensions, to the currency. And as far as I understand it, they're already spending money in Scotland on IndyRef 2, what they call IndyRef 2, when they should be getting on, Scottish nationalists should be getting on with fighting the pandemic. That, I think, is what the people of Scotland want to see. And he might pay tribute, by the way, to the merits of the United Kingdom in rolling out a vaccine across the whole of the country. And I'm told, by the way, Mr. Speaker, that they can't even bring themselves to say the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Perhaps he could just say that he likes the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine.
Well, let us move to Yorkshire instead with Julian Sturdy. Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the vaccination programme making very encouraging progress, can the Prime Minister reaffirm that lifting restrictions to return to normal as soon as it is safe is an overriding national priority? And can I invite him to consider drawing a line in the sand in terms of vaccination of sufficient numbers of the priority group, the reaching of which will trigger a phased relaxation of controls as immunity widens?
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that we're going to go down the top 4 priority groups who account for 88%, sadly, of COVID deaths. The target is, as he knows, by the 15th of February, there will then be an opportunity to look very carefully at the measures that we have in place, and we'll try to reverse the restrictions as soon as we reasonably can in a way that doesn't involve overwhelming the NHS.
Let's head to Northern Ireland with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. Sir Geoffrey.
The Prime Minister promised us that Northern Ireland will continue to have unfettered access to the UK internal market. And yet in my constituency, consumers are facing empty supermarket shelves. They can't get parcels delivered from Great Britain. Small businesses can't bring spare parts and raw materials into Northern Ireland from Great Britain. Steel importers are facing tariffs, and we have many other problems, all caused by the Northern Ireland Protocol. So what I and the people of Northern Ireland need to know from the Prime Minister, as leader of the United Kingdom, is what his government is going to do to address this. If he will consider invoking Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol to resolve these issues, because the Trader Support Service is welcome, but it isn't the solution alone. We need direct government intervention to deal with this now.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman. I can tell him that at the moment goods are flowing effectively and in normal volumes between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So far, no lorries have been turned back. Yes, of course, there are teething problems, and what I can say, what I can confirm to him, is that if there are problems that we believe are disproportionate, then we will have no hesitation in invoking Article 16.
Let's head to Rushcliffe with Ruth Edwards. Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate my right honourable friend on his trade deal with the EU and welcome the prospect of a more global approach to our trading policy. Would he agree with me that a free port based at East Midlands Airport, connected to the world by trains, planes and automobiles, and focused on generating green growth is key to the success of global Britain?
Well, I'm delighted that she's campaigning for a free port. I'm a passionate supporter of free ports. They will be a process, as she knows, and successful applicants will be announced in the spring.
Let's head up to St Albans with Daisy Cooper. Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope that the Prime Minister will join with me in congratulating the local GPs and all the admin, medical and volunteer staff who have set up the Batchford Hall Vaccination Centre in St Albans at incredible speed. They have already vaccinated thousands of residents, but their enormous local drive and success is being hampered because they are only being provided with enough vaccine supplies to vaccinate 1,100 people a day for just 2 days a week. And they are often only getting the vaccine deliveries at very short notice. So will the Prime Minister personally intervene to ensure that the Batchford Hall Vaccination Centre in St Albans and all PCN-led local vaccine services have a much greater and more consistent vaccine supply so they can get on with the job of vaccinating the country against COVID?
Well, I certainly thank the GP Vaccination Centre in St Albans for what they're doing and for their wonderful work, and it's thanks to, as I say, to primary care networks across the country that we've done 2.8 million vaccines, 2.4 million people, and the constraint is not the distribution network; it is the supply. But don't forget that we have a bigger supply than most other European, all other European countries. Indeed, we've virtually done as many vaccines as all other European countries put together, and we will be ramping up that supply in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking Shropshire's defence engineers, both in the public sector and the private sector, currently working on the Warrior and Boxer military vehicle programmes, doing a great job. But as the government considers making a decision on the Challenger 2 life extension programme, will you bear in mind that excellent workforce in Shropshire that have such a history and a modern-day practice of delivering UK defence?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, I'm familiar with the superb workforce in Shropshire to which he refers, and of course there is a competition currently going on, negotiations going on with the modernisation that he speaks of. As he knows, we've made the biggest investment in our defences since the Cold War with the recent spending review, but it would not be right for me to comment on these negotiations at this stage.
Let's head to Hornsey Green with Catherine West. Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, widening inequalities are tearing communities apart, and COVID's made things much, much worse. In Hornsey and Wood Green, we have a 182% increase in joblessness. Today, will the Prime Minister pledge to reverse the planned £1,000 per annum cut to universal credit to provide a certain future to all of those increasing numbers of people who use universal credit as a lifeline?
Well, Mr. Speaker, not only have we upgraded universal credit by £1,000, but as I've said, extended, increased the local housing allowance, increased the living wage, many other benefits. We will keep all of this under constant review. But I may say that I know that she speaks for the Labour front bench. The current Labour policy, as far as I understand it, is to abolish universal credit. And I think many people in receipt of universal credit, knowing how important it is, will find that stunning in view of what she's just said.
To Brigham Gould with Andrew Percy. Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here in East Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire, in the Humber, we have some of the highest flood risk in the country, and we're still waiting for the report into the flooding on the River Aire at East Carrick and Snaith, just up the road from me here, which took part 10 months ago. I welcome the doubling of flood defence funding. It is most welcome in an area particularly such as mine, but we often come up against the challenges of bureaucracy and sometimes the Treasury funding rules. So can I ask the Prime Minister to look at what more can be done to reduce the red tape in bringing schemes forward, and what we can do to, whilst I appreciate the need for national agencies, also utilise local flood councils or drainage boards by providing them with direct cash, as well as to the Environment Agency, to bring forward projects that will protect homes and people.
Prime Minister.
Yes. Well, my honourable friend makes a really excellent point about the need to improve flood defences, and that's why we're investing £2.6 billion in 1,000 flood defences in England in the next few years, in the next 6 years. And the Humber Estuary, the area that he represents so well, is one of 4 areas which will benefit from trials into long-term ways of making all our country more resistant to flooding.
Let's head to Kevin Brennan in Cardiff. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's real disappointment that a reciprocal work permit-free deal for touring musicians and performers has not been agreed with the EU. No one's interested in a blame game. It's clearly fixable and in Britain's economic and cultural interest to do so quickly, but it needs leadership from the top. So will the Prime Minister meet on this virtually with a small group of MPs, including the Conservative chair of the Culture Select Committee? We're all singing from the same song sheet. Will he please say yes to the meeting?
I will, of course, ensure that...
We're going to switch from the Parliamentary Chamber in Westminster to Holyrood. First Minister's questions and Nicola Sturgeon.
Figures, of course, underline the severity of the pressure on the National Health Service and the fact that it is increasing. I'm also very sad to report that in the past 24 hours, a further 79 deaths have been registered of patients who first tested positive in the previous 28 days, and the total number of deaths under that measurement is now 5,102. National Records of Scotland has also just published its weekly update. This includes cases where COVID is a suspected or contributory cause of death, even if it has not been confirmed through a test. Today's update shows that by Sunday, the total number of registered deaths linked to COVID under the wider definition was 7,074. 384 of those deaths were registered last week, and that is 197 more than in the previous week, and it is indeed the highest weekly figure we have recorded since May. Some of the increase last week, of course, may be down to people registering deaths last week that had occurred over the Christmas and New Year period. But even so, this figure is heartbreakingly high, and it reminds us again of the grief that this virus continues to cause. And yet again, I send my condolences to all those who have lost a loved one. Presiding Officer, just a little while ago, the Cabinet Secretary for Health made a detailed statement about our vaccination programme. As I give today's statement, which will inevitably focus on the sacrifices we are asking of people, it is worth highlighting some of the key points that she made. We have already vaccinated more than 80% of care home residents in Scotland and more than half of frontline health and social care workers. The vaccination of those over the age of 80 is underway and gathering speed. First doses for the over 80s will be completed by the start of February, and everyone aged over 70 will have been offered vaccination by mid-February. It is our aim to vaccinate everyone over 65 and also those with extreme clinical vulnerability by the end of February. This means that by the start of March, 1.4 million people will have received at least the first dose of the vaccine. To support this, more than 1,100 vaccination centres are already operational. That number will increase with mass centres opening too as supplies increase. All of this is positive. Vaccination offers us a route back to a more normal life and does give us real hope for the future. But for now, of course, we are in a race against the virus. To win the race, we must complete the vaccination programme as quickly as possible, and that is what we will do. But we must also slow down the virus. Today's numbers demonstrate again why that is so necessary. In early December, we were recording approximately 100 new cases of COVID every week for every 100,000 people. That figure since then has almost trebled. And that's, of course, mainly because the new variant, which is much easier to transmit, is spreading rapidly. The new variant now makes up around 60% of new cases and is making it far more difficult to get the R number back below 1 without severe restrictions. Of course, we now have severe restrictions in place, and while it is still very early days, there are some signs that lockdown may be starting to have an effect. The rapid increase in cases that we saw around the turn of the year appears to have slowed down and begun to stabilise. That is good news, but at this stage it can give us no room for complacency. It is still too soon to be entirely confident that the situation is stabilising, and of course, even if it is, this will only be because of lockdown. It is not, unfortunately, an indication that it is safe to ease it yet in any way. The number of new cases is still far too high, and of course, all of this is having a significant and severe impact on our health service. With the number of people being infected every day remaining as high as it is, the pressure on the NHS is likely to increase further and continue for some time. And of course, as I reported a few moments ago, last week saw the highest number of registered deaths from COVID since early May. So we must continue to do everything possible to reduce case numbers. This is essential to relieve the pressure on the NHS, but also to save lives. That is why the Cabinet considered yesterday some further tightening of the lockdown restrictions to ensure that they can be as effective as they need to be in suppressing the virus. There are 6 changes that we intend to make, and the regulations giving effect to these will, subject to Parliament's approval, take effect on Saturday. Now, I am aware that some of these changes will sound technical and relatively minor. However, we believe that both individually and collectively, these additional measures in further reducing the interactions that allow the virus to spread will help our essential efforts to suppress it. And of course, however technical the changes might sound, I know that all of them involve further restrictions on our essential liberties. So I want to give an assurance again that none of these decisions are arrived at lightly. Let me therefore set out now what these changes are. Firstly, we intend to limit the availability and operation of click and collect retail services. Only retailers selling essential items will be allowed to offer click and collect. This will include, for example, clothes and footwear, baby equipment, homeware and books. All other click and collect services must stop. More importantly, though, for click and collect services that are allowed, staggered appointments will need to be offered to avoid any potential for queuing, and access inside premises for collection will not be permitted. The details will be set down in regulations and in guidance. I know that businesses affected by this change will be disappointed and that many have gone to great lengths to make services as safe as possible, but we must reduce as far as is possible the reasons people have right now for leaving home and coming into contact with others. I welcome the actions of those businesses that have voluntarily suspended click and collect and tightened their procedures in, for example, relation to face coverings. Secondly, we intend to apply restrictions to takeaway services. Customers will no longer be permitted to go inside to collect takeaway food or coffee. Any outlet wishing to offer takeaway will have to do so from a serving hatch or doorway. This is to reduce the risk of customers coming into contact indoors with each other or with staff. Thirdly, we intend to change the rules around consumption of alcohol. At the moment, different parts of Scotland have different laws in relation to the consumption of alcohol in outdoor public places. However, from Saturday, it will be against the law in all Level 4 areas to drink alcohol outdoors in public. That will mean, for example, that buying a takeaway pint and drinking it outdoors will not be permitted. Again, I know this is not a popular move, but it is intended to underline and support the fact that we should only be leaving home right now for essential purposes. That includes exercise or recreation, but it does not include simple socialising. And when you do leave home, you should only meet one person from another household in a group no bigger than 2 people. I know this is a hard message and it is absolutely not one that I want to be sending, but it is vital to reduce the risk of the virus spreading. Fourthly, and significantly, we intend to strengthen the obligation on employers to allow their staff to work from home whenever possible. The law already says that we should only be leaving home to go to work if it is work that cannot be done from home. This is a legal obligation that falls on individuals. However, we will now introduce statutory guidance to make clear to employers that they must support their workers to work from home wherever possible. For all employers, the basic but vital message is this. If your staff were working from home during the first lockdown last year, they should be working from home now, and you should be facilitating that. Fifthly, we will strengthen the provisions in relation to work inside people's houses. We've already issued guidance to the effect that in level 4 areas, work is only permitted within a private dwelling if it is essential for the upkeep, maintenance and functioning of the household, and we will now put this guidance into law. Now, the final change is an amendment to the regulations requiring people to stay at home. But I want to be clear, this is intended to close an apparent loophole rather than change the spirit of the law. It will also bring the wording of the stay-at-home regulations in Scotland into line with the other UK nations. Right now, the law states that people can only leave home for an essential purpose. However, having left home for an essential purpose, someone could then stay out of their home to do something that is not essential without breaching the law as it stands. So the amendment will make it clear that people must not leave or remain outside the home unless for an essential purpose. This change will provide legal clarity to facilitate any necessary enforcement. But I want to be clear that it doesn't change the range of essential purposes that currently enable people to leave their house, nor does it, for example, put any time limit on how long you can be outdoors for essential exercise. But it does mean that if the police challenge you for being out of the house doing something that is not essential, it will not be a defence to say that you initially left to do something that was. Presiding Officer, I know that none of this makes for enjoyable listening. If it's any comfort, though I don't expect it will be, it gives me no pleasure to be talking about further restrictions on businesses and on our individual freedoms to come and go as we please. But please know that we would not be doing any of this if we did not believe it essential to get and keep this potentially deadly virus under control. Case numbers are still so high and the new variant is so infectious that we must be as tough and as effective as we possibly can be to stop it spreading. That does mean taking further steps to stop people from meeting and interacting indoors and also outdoors. Today's measures will help us to achieve that. They are a regrettable but necessary means to an end. In concluding, I want to stress again that though these are dark and difficult times, we also have grounds for hope. As I indicated earlier, there are some early signs that the lockdown is beginning to have an effect, so we must stick with it. In addition, vaccination is already protecting a lot of the people who are most vulnerable to the virus, and it will protect many more in the weeks and months ahead. And finally, however hopeless this situation makes all of us feel at times, the fact is none of us are powerless in the face of this virus. We can't guarantee we won't get it or pass it on. It is, after all, highly infectious. But we can all behave in a way that significantly reduces our risk of getting it or passing it on. So please continue to do that. And I want to stress this point. Please stick to the spirit and not just to the letter of these rules. Don't think in terms of the maximum interactions you can have without breaking the rules. Please think instead about how you minimise your interactions to the bare essentials to remove as many opportunities as possible for the virus to spread. And in everything you do, assume that the virus is there with you, that either you have it or any person you're in contact with has it, and act then in a way that prevents it passing between you. All of this means staying at home except for genuinely essential purposes, and that includes working from home whenever possible. Except for essential purposes, do not have people from other households in your house and do not go into theirs. And please follow the facts advice at all times when you are out and about. All of this is how we keep ourselves and our loved ones safe, and it is how we keep the virus under control until the vaccines get to do their work. So at this critical and dangerous moment, please stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, First Minister. The First Minister will now take questions. I would encourage all members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak buttons, and I call Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the First Minister for advance notice of her statement. The announcement of new restrictions today to both takeaway and click and collect services, while understandable, will be a further disappointment to businesses. Business groups have said that the evidence for this decision has not yet been made plain to them, and for many these restrictions were unexpected only a week ago. They thought that their services would continue and in many cases had invested heavily to make their premises safe to keep trading. I am pleased that the First Minister says there will be funding made available at some point, but is there not a case for extra compensation for businesses who were told by this government what to do to become COVID compliant, spent money making all of the changes that ministers required of them, and are now being told that they have to adapt again?
First Minister.
These are all reasonable points. On the question of evidence, we will publish probably just about now an evidence paper, an update of the one we published last week to put into the public domain for scrutiny by members of Parliament and also by the wider public. The state of the epidemic, the evidence underpinning the decisions we are making. I fully understand the call for businesses in different sectors for specific evidence about transmission in their sectors. And when we were at a stage with community prevalence of the virus lower, that was much more relevant to look with a laser focus at exactly where the virus was spreading. When we have higher community transmission being fuelled by this faster spreading variant, it is much more a case that what the evidence tells us is that overall, in general, we have to minimise all of the interactions between ourselves and each other. Now, lockdown, as was announced last week, has, I think, substantially done that, and we have data that suggests that traffic volumes have fallen, that people's contacts have fallen, but we do know, anecdotally as well as from other areas, that there are some parts of the economy and some aspects of individual behaviour where, understandably, people are still coming together in a way against a faster transmitting variant of the virus risks continued spread. And that's why we've set out these further tightenings today. In Click and Collect, for example, I know many businesses have already decided voluntarily to suspend. We are not taking away it altogether, but we are putting in place more mitigations and greater restrictions, all for the end of suppressing the virus. Finally, Presiding Officer, on the issue of financial compensation, there is significant money available, much of it already with businesses, much more of it flowing to businesses over the course of this month. And the Finance Secretary recently set out additional payments for those in the hospitality and retail sectors, for example. We will continue to look on an ongoing basis at what, within our resources, we can do and where there are legitimate calls for more financial support. But I hope businesses, however difficult this is, will understand, as individuals do, that all of this is simply necessary and inescapable right now if we are not to see ourselves and our National Health Service overwhelmed by this virus and, unfortunately, many more people dying from it.
Ruth Davidson.
Thank you. This decision is the latest where businesses don't feel involved or consulted by the government. They feel like an afterthought, and no wonder. We called for a COVID Business Council months ago. The First Minister said she'd take it forward, but it's still not been launched. The new funding announced earlier this week is welcome, but it was welcome way back on the 9th of December too, when the government announced an extra £185 million of support for business and £55 million funding for sports clubs. And in November, when they announced the Strategic Framework Support Fund. And it was welcome in late October, when they announced a £30 million discretionary fund. Of all of those funds, we've seen only evidence of £6 million reaching businesses. Will the First Minister agree to immediately publish how much of all of that funding has actually reached businesses? And will she tell us just now, has even a tenth of all of that funding been delivered months on?
First Minister.
We will publish figures as that information comes through. Local authorities are in the main administering this funding. But if you take the £715 million that has been allocated to business support since October, £600 million of that is already live. The vast majority of other funds go live this month. Payments are flowing to businesses, and at the end of this month, the businesses that are eligible for the additional top-up payments will receive those payments, but we will continue to publish figures as we proceed. On consultation with businesses, we discuss with businesses on an ongoing basis, with business organisations, with individual sectors, and I appreciate the desire for as much consultation as possible, and we will try to do that as far as we possibly can. But ultimately, right now, we face decisions that are inescapable. No amount of discussion and consultation takes us away from the sharp point that we have a rapidly spreading virus that, if we don't reduce and minimise interactions, will overwhelm us, overwhelm our National Health Service and lead to the deaths of many more people than would otherwise be the case. So I'm afraid that is the harsh reality of the situation we're in just now. And my duty as First Minister and the duty of the government is not to shy away from these difficult decisions, to take the responsibility for these decisions, to stand up here, to set them out, to set out the reasons for them and the evidence behind them, and yes, do as much as we can, as we will continue to do, to support those affected by them.
Ruth Davison.
Responsibility not to let viable businesses fall. And here's where we're at. Leaked documents show that only 7 in 30 business funds have launched. The FSB Scotland says that funding is trapped in an administrative logjam. Another fund that's not included in that list of 30 has opened. The Digital Boost Development Grant launched yesterday morning. It was meant to remain open for 6 weeks, but it has already shut within 24 hours because it was inundated and oversubscribed. That is the measure of how desperate things are. Businesses are crying out for funding, but the funds aren't opening and the guidance hasn't been delivered. The First Minister just talked about councils. Well, councils want to get it out the door, but they're hearing nothing from the Scottish Government. If you click onto the Falkirk Council website, they list 16 Scottish Government funds, and then underneath they say, and I will quote it directly, "Please do not contact us about these funds as we do not have any details yet." First Minister, how many funds have even had guidance issued, never mind delivered money into people's pockets?
First Minister.
All of the funds, 600 million of the 750 million announced most recently, is already live. The other amount of that, which has been announced more recently, will be going live over the course of the next period. I haven't seen the leaked documents that Ruth Davis refers to. I'm happy to have a look at them and see whether they are up to date or whether they are perhaps out of date. But since October, we've allocated £750 million to business support. That includes support of up to £3,000 every 4 weeks through the Strategic Framework Business Fund. There is additional bespoke funding for sectors like tourism and culture, which have been hit particularly hard, and groups such as self-employed, newly self-employed and taxi drivers. On the 11th of January, just a few days ago, we announced top-up grant support for hospitality, retail and leisure businesses. For larger businesses, that will be a top-up of £25,000, which will be paid later this month. Compared to £9,000 in England, for example, smaller businesses will receive a smaller amount. And of course, just yesterday, we announced additional funding for our island communities so that they can help businesses that are in level 3 areas as opposed to level 4. I've had discussions with the Finance Secretary about how we do support councils to get the money out of the door more quickly and into the pockets of businesses more quickly. The Digital Boost Fund that has been mentioned already, it has very quickly...
Well, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon there facing questions from Ruth Davison, the Scottish Conservative leader. Before that, announcing a slew of new restrictions that will take effect from this coming Saturday, based on what Nicola Sturgeon described as an ongoing problem, to put it mildly, with the new strain, the new variant of coronavirus. 79 deaths reported in the last 24 hours. She said 60% of those new cases were down to the new variant as well. She hopes to have 1.4 million people in Scotland vaccinated by the start of March. On those new restrictions, click and collect in Scotland will be restricted from Saturday. Takeaway outlets will have to use a serving hatch or a doorway to stop people going inside to collect their food and potentially spread the virus. On alcohol in level tier 4 areas, there will be no more takeaway alcohol, and there'll be stricter rules on things, for instance, like the obligation employers face when it comes to their workers working in the workplace rather than at home. That following hard on the heels of the first Westminster PMQs. Let's reflect on both in the company of our political correspondent, Kate McCann, who's in Westminster. Kate, welcome to you. We've got these new restrictions from Saturday in Scotland, though interestingly, Nicola Sturgeon said the general trend of the statistics was promising.
She did, and it was actually quite a similar approach to Boris Johnson, both leaders saying that the early data they are looking at shows that the tiered restrictions in England and the lockdown measures in England and Scotland are starting to have some impact, although we know that the full data will be with us by the end of the week. But what we clearly are seeing is that Nicola Sturgeon feels that now is the right time to introduce some extra measures. And you ran through them there, but it's interesting, isn't it, that they are the very same things that have been discussed in a number of different outlets across the week here in London too. They are the things that are being talked about behind the scenes in Westminster, like the potential for changing the rules on click and collect, like stopping people from going inside takeaways. The alcohol restrictions, of course, already exist here. You're not allowed to get a takeaway pint. You're not allowed to drink it outside. That was introduced by Boris Johnson originally. But there are some big questions too about what might happen next here. And as you say, the data is going to be really important in determining that. Boris Johnson and Nicola Sturgeon both say the early signs are good, but Boris Johnson also refused to rule out restrictions in PMQs today. He was pushed by Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, on why nothing had been introduced already when the data was not picking up. There was some talk in Westminster about vaccinations, 2.8 million vaccinations already, and the Prime Minister committing to 24/7 vaccination centres, although earlier on today Nadeem Zahawi, the Vaccines Minister, suggested that would only happen when the top 4-tier groups have been vaccinated because it's not really appropriate for those people. Here is that exchange just before between Labour and the Conservatives.
I welcome news that's come out this morning about a pilot of 24/7 vaccine centres. I anticipate there's going to be huge clamour for this. So can the Prime Minister tell us, when will the 24/7 vaccine centres be open to the public, because I understand they're not at the moment, and when will they be rolled out across the country?
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for what he says about the rollout of vaccines, and I can tell him that we'll be going to 24/7 as soon as we can, and my right friend, the Health Secretary, will be setting out more about that in due course.
There was also, during Prime Minister's questions today, an interesting discussion between the two men about the free school meals vouchers. Of course, that's been controversial over the last couple of days.
It was interesting to see both of them were chided by the Speaker for their unparliamentary language as well. Kate, thanks very much indeed. Kate McCann there, reflecting on events in Parliament and elsewhere with the rest of the day's news. That's with Jane Secker coming up in the next couple of minutes. Stay with us.
This is Sky News Today. It's 1 o'clock. These are our headlines. The Prime Minister's pushing to introduce a 24/7 vaccine programme as soon as possible. Boris Johnson has also refused to rule out tightening England's lockdown as Scotland announces stricter measures. An insult to families. The government promises action following criticism of food parcels sent out to feed children during lockdown. And we'll be live in Dublin, where the Irish Prime Minister is due to apologise after an investigation found an appalling level of infant mortality in the country's mother and baby homes. Good afternoon. We're going to start by recapping some of the headlines to emerge out of Prime Minister's questions in the last hour. Boris Johnson pledged to introduce a 24/7 vaccine programme as soon as possible. He also refused to rule out tightening lockdown measures in England, but did insist that current restrictions were having an impact on transmission. Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Kate McCann, on the possibility of more restrictions. And Kate, in the last half hour, we've heard from Scotland that they are certainly tightening up their restrictions with regards to takeaways and click and collect and drinking outdoors. Pressure on to Boris Johnson to possibly follow suit?
Well, I think it was really interesting listening to both leaders today, actually, because, as you say, Nicola Sturgeon did introduce those tougher measures, and they are the things that have been talked about here in Westminster too over the course of the last couple of days. But Boris Johnson, as yet, hasn't done the same. What was really fascinating, though, is that both leaders are on the same page when it comes to the data, because we knew it would take until around the end of this week to start to see whether the lockdown measures and whether the Tier 4 restrictions had had any impact on trying to cut down the number of cases. Now, the Prime Minister today at PMQs and Nicola Sturgeon just then in her address both said the early signs are promising. But Nicola Sturgeon introduced more restrictions, as you set out there, while the Prime Minister refused to rule it out. Now, that might mean that Boris Johnson is still considering whether or not those are something that he would like to see here too. Now, as I say, they are similar in terms of tone. The alcohol restrictions that are being introduced in Scotland already exist here. You couldn't get takeaway pints here in this lockdown at any point. In Scotland, you won't be able to drink them in Tier 4 areas or drink any alcohol in Tier 4 areas outside now either. But the click and collect restrictions, of course, we've already seen John Lewis imposing those changes on themselves. And there have been some concerns and some extra guidance from government for supermarkets here, where when it comes to things like queuing, mask wearing inside, and also just trying to make sure that things are very similar to the March lockdown, particularly given the new variant of COVID-19 that now exists and that's putting pressure on the NHS. So it was interesting to hear Boris Johnson say very pointedly, actually, to the Speaker that if he did have any more restrictions to introduce, he would be coming to the House of Commons to discuss them. He was pushed by Sir Keir Starmer, though, the Labour leader, during that session on why he hadn't made decisions sooner. The Prime Minister also went on to talk about vaccines. And we know there's been this tension about the optimism of the vaccine rollout programme versus the very dire numbers that we're all still seeing for deaths and for cases in the UK, and the tension about what that means when it comes to people following the rules. The Prime Minister said 2.8 million vaccinations have been carried out so far, and there have been a number of promises from the Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, in committees earlier this morning about the continuation of that rollout. The Prime Minister also, interestingly, said 24-hour vaccination centres is something that will happen here, but that it might not happen quite yet. Nadhim Zahawi again suggested this morning that for those top 4 groups that are currently seeing the rollout of vaccines, the very most vulnerable, they won't benefit necessarily from those 24-hour vaccine centres. So something that the Prime Minister is pledging for the future. There was also an exchange, of course, in Prime Minister's questions, quite a testy one, in which the Speaker got involved about free school meals.
Within 24 hours of getting the advice on the 18th about the spread of the new variant, we acted to put the vast part of the country into much, much tougher measures. And indeed, they have, what we are now seeing, and it's very, very important to stress that these are early days, we are now seeing the beginnings of some signs that is starting to have an effect in many parts of the country, but by no means everywhere. And it is early days, Mr. Speaker, and people must keep their discipline, keep enforcing the rules, and work together, as I've said, to roll out that vaccine programme.
The advice was a November-style lockdown is not enough. How on earth was putting people into a different tiered system in answer to the advice that was given. And isn't this the situation that every time there's a big decision to take, the Prime Minister gets there late? The next big decision is obvious. The current restrictions are not strong enough to control the virus. Stronger restrictions are needed. And it's no point members opposite shaking their heads. In a week or two, the Prime Minister is likely to be asking members to vote for this. So can the Prime Minister tell us, when infection rates are much higher than last March, when hospital admissions are much higher than last March, when death rates are much higher than last March, why on earth are restrictions weaker than last March?
So there you go, the exchange there between the two leaders, and the Prime Minister went on to set out the lockdown measures which have been introduced, and again to reiterate that message that if further restrictions do need to be introduced, as they have been in Scotland, that he won't hesitate to come